So we were talking before we went to break a little bit about vehicle inspections in the state of Missouri. Illinois is certainly different as usual, but it seems as though it's punitive to have these vehicle inspections for residents. At least the folks at Show Me Institute are looking into the benefit and cost of having these vehicle inspections, and we're happy to welcome Patrick Ishmael on with the Show Me Institute. Patrick, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So what have you found in your research into these vehicle inspections that are a requirement for Missouri residents?
Well, in this case, it's actually the Missouri legislature who has done the lion's share of this work. And what they've found, or at least one of the legislators has found, is that when you look at the benefits that vehicle inspections bring to a certain state, and we're talking really strictly about personal vehicle inspections, that across the country, you don't necessarily see a safety benefit, which is kind of counterintuitive because I think a lot of times when we think about things like safety inspections, that we also think that they actually work. But what's increasingly becoming clear across the country, and other states are starting to repeal at least some of their inspection requirements, is that when they are requiring individuals to have their vehicles inspected on a 2-year basis or what have you, you're not really seeing an actual safety benefit. And instead, in the case of Missouri, what's happening is Missourians are spending about $30 million a year on a particular requirement imposed by the state that isn't necessarily working. And it's a really good example, I think, of how government can impose direct costs on folks through taxation, and can also impose kind of an indirect cost through regulation. And this is a regulation that it looks like the Missouri House is inclined to repeal at this point, because it looks like it really doesn't have the kind of safety benefit that people were expecting. And it does impose a cost, even though it's not a tax. It imposes a cost on individuals that they could otherwise just keep in their pocket.
Stephen, this is Tony Colombo. I did this story just a couple days ago about the bill that is making its way through Jeff City that would eliminate these biannual inspections, and people that were against it were speaking out. I don't have the quotes in front of me, but they were claiming that this was going to make vehicles less safe and it was going to cause more accidents, and all these other safety issues that they were raising. Are they citing any facts? Is that just a belief that they hold, or when people say that, or do they have anything that they are looking at as proof that would happen?
Yeah, I don't know what research they're looking at in particular. I can give you a different example where I think folks assumed something would happen, and because they assumed something would happen, that after the research came in, they assumed that it did in fact happen. And it goes back to when the country was debating whether to increase the speed limits on the highways. And nationwide, pretty much all of the highways used to be at 55 miles per hour. And then there was greater latitude given to raise to 65 or 70 or even higher. And what folks assumed would happen is that when you raise that speed limit, that what you're going to end up seeing is a lot more fatal car accidents. And what you really ended up seeing, unexpectedly, was folks who were formerly using, say, U.S. highways that may have a little bit, less oversight by the police, but they're not divided. And so what ended up happening is you had fewer of these head-on collisions on these highways that were not necessarily as closely monitored, and you had more people going to the main highways because they could actually go faster on them. So I think, folks who say that there is a great danger in removing these fees, I'm open to any research that they have. My suspicion, just based off of what I've seen, though, is that there is this presumption, and it seems intuitive that if you raise speed limits or if you require inspections, that those are going to have safety impacts. But I think a lot of times when you actually look at the data themselves, you end up finding a very different conclusion. I think that's what you're ending up seeing in the research on these fees for safety inspections.
Who are the entities that are pushing to keep, or who maybe pushed in the first place to have these inspections in place to begin with? Is there a political purpose, or is there a group of individuals that benefits from keeping them in place?
Well, I don't know exactly who instituted them. I think that if you're looking for a group of folks who probably benefit from the system and would want to maintain it, and there's been reporting on this as well, it's of course the mechanics and the garages that would actually conduct these. Now, at $12 a pop, these fees you're not going to get rich off them. But certainly, if you are, bringing in a car and you find something that may be a little bit wayward, it gives you an opportunity to, of course, say, hey, while you're in here, I do see a problem here, or you may not have to address this now, but I do see a problem. You may want to get it fixed. That also allows for an opportunity to make a sale, of course. And there's nothing wrong with, making a sale if you're able to give these inspections. The question is whether or not the state ought to be requiring these inspections to begin with. And of course, if you stand to benefit from the system that the state has set up, I think that you're going to be pretty interested in ensuring that safe system maintains. But there's a difference between the public interest and more narrow private interests that may benefit from state regulation. I think in this case, it seems pretty clear that the general public interest is better served by removing this requirement. But so long as the requirement is in place, there are interests that do benefit from it. And I think that explains what some of the opposition may be related to.
Everybody knows that feeling of dread when you look at your sticker and you're like, oh no, I'm a month away. I got to go do this. It's not the money. It's just the inconvenience of it. Patrick, the money that is raised in the state from the fees that are paid for the inspections, is that money dedicated to any one specific thing, or is that just going into the general Missouri budget to be used for whatever? Like, is anything going to be losing out as far as funding if these were to go away?
No, not to my knowledge. And I think that that's all the more reason to make sure that when we are talking about when the state is imposing regulation, it's one thing to say, we want to make sure our roads are being better maintained. And so to do that, we're going to impose a gas tax, or we're going to maybe increase a gas tax, because at least in that case, you're talking about actually having the cost of a service kind of align with the use of the service. But when you're talking about these fees, that's really not what you're seeing. And I think that, again, whether it's a direct cost through taxation or an indirect cost through regulation where you're being required to spend money on these inspections, I think that you really do have to assess whether the government's intended purpose is being effectuated. And unfortunately, in the case of these inspections, you're not seeing it, and I don't think it would actually impact in any meaningful way things that are currently funded by the government.
Well, Patrick Ishmael with the Show Me Institute, we appreciate the research that is being done on this, and also the follow-up with Show Me Institute. People can read about this and a lot of other things at showmeinstitute.org. And we always appreciate your advocacy for the Missouri taxpayer and the fiscal responsibility that Show Me Institute shows on a regular basis. You guys do a lot of the legwork and make it easy for folks to go to showmeinstitute.org and consume all of this information. So we appreciate you, Patrick. Thanks for coming on today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Go to showmeinstitute.org and read more about that.